it's the worst feeling ever for a shopper to be excited about something and then have for whatever reason, their excitement squashed, right? That hurts the shopper's enthusiasm about your brand because they're going to assume that you caused them to suffer, even if there's some regulatory system they're working within.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Decoding Cross-Border E-Commerce Podcast by Zonos. Your host, Aaron Bezzant, with Clint Reid. And today, we have a special guest, Aaron.
We do. Yeah. Very special.
Wow. That's what they're
saying. Josh Beitler.
Yep.
People are talking.
They are talking.
Yes.
Well, thanks. Glad to be here.
We have Josh here to talk about the shopper experience, everything about what's it like for an international shopper to buy, and what are the things you can do to improve their experience. And Josh is the man of the hour. You have a lot of you've developed a lot of experience in this, so
yes.
We want to ask
my life.
now, Josh, did you come with a joke? That's the most important thing before we really ask about you and yourself.
Yeah, I was wondering if you guys heard the one about the monkeys that shared an Amazon account.
Haven't heard that one.
They were primates.
And on that note, should we talk about a shopping experience?
Yeah, we should.
We should. Because I think international shopping is exactly the same as domestic, right?
Yes.
Famously
it's got to
so.
be exactly the same.
Very much so.
No difference. But why? First off, why is this kid over here? Have any experience? So tell us about your background, Josh. And
yeah, well, I'm the product manager here at Zonos over our shopper experience. So that includes our checkout, Zonos Hello, our Shopify app, and everything in between. Been doing this for almost 9 years now at Zonos. So I originally started in development, working on our checkout product, learned a lot about the ins and outs of what goes into that, integrating it, what the actual feature set it needed. Then moved over to lead the product side of it and building our new checkout, building our Shopify app, and then all of the kind of next generation of e-commerce software that we have here at Zonos, which we're quite excited about. And I also buy a lot of things online, so I'm highly qualified.
Hey, Josh has been here since like high school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And for the listeners, I would call him Doogie Howser.
Yeah.
And only certain people at Zonos got the joke. You had to be over, probably born in the latest in the 80s.
I loved watching Doogie Howser.
I love Doogie Howser. This kid was Doogie Howser.
Yeah.
But not in the medical field, right?
Right.
No.
The Doogie Howser of cross-border. That's what we get today.
Exactly.
Well, great. This is exciting. Let's just start with, what is the shopper experience like, and how is it different for international, and why is this important to address?
Yeah, I like to think of it, there's what you might have your domestic focused shopper experience, and then like a domestic native shopper experience, then you have a cross-border native shopping experience, right? And for a lot of us, we're used to the domestic native shopping experience, Shopify, Amazon, what have you. And those work really good when you're going from the same country to the same country. Where it starts to fall apart kind of historically is the cross-border native shopping experience, which for a lot of reasons is different. So first thing is your currency exchange is all over the place. So now your payment processing is happening with currency, going on, which changes how prices are displayed. That has to be dynamic by country. There's a lot of fraud related things that goes into that. And due to all of these challenges, it's not really feasible for someone that wants a cross-border native checkout to use something like Shopify without any modifications. And because of that, it's kind of a niche field, smaller players. And what you get is a lot of kind of just hacked together pieces of software historically. And they're not very pretty. They don't engender a lot of trust. They don't load very fast, but they kind of get the job done. That's kind of where we've been up until the last little while. So with our checkout, we try really hard to build an experience that is as native for cross-border feeling as it is for domestic. And that means taking care of the calculation of duty tax and everything, currency conversion, fraud protection, all of that, but packaging it and bundling it in a high trust way that looks and feels just like a modern piece of software.
Now, Josh, I know there's a lot of e-commerce companies out there that basically say, I'm not going to worry about localizing my website
Yeah.
for my international shoppers. If they come to me, the transaction's in, let's say, US dollars or whatever the domestic currency is. And it's up to them to deal with their own payment, exchange rates. If they want to, they basically have to figure out all of these things themselves.
Yep.
I can see some advantages of that from a simplicity standpoint for the merchant. It's like, I'm not going to change a thing. But what kind of ramifications does that typically have for their business?
Well, it can sound simpler, at the when you don't go deep into it. But if you ever have looked into the way that currency conversion, as one small specific example, works, where do you get your rates from? How are you presenting them? What happens in the cart between shopping and buying? What happens on your credit card statement as a shopper? What happens on your bank account and when the money comes in? All of these things are super complex and really gnarly. You have to have specific knowledge about where to get rates from, what affects rates. And so you might think you're saving time by doing all of this kind of piecemeal, but what you end up with is kind of a half-baked set of hacks for all of these little things. Additionally, that's going to make it all feel really unintegrated. It's really obvious to a shopper when something is not, native feeling.
I was in Texas last week and I was talking with a business owner that had been exploring ways to handle the currency problem that you're just talking about. And, they have an entity it's a US company, has an entity in the UK and I believe Australia. And so their thought was, well, we'll just I think we can figure out Canadian dollars to, settle in Canadian dollar, right? Present in the local currency to the shopper.
Yep.
What are some of the challenges they're going to experience trying to get payments working for this?
Yeah, I mean, it's nightmarish even when you do have entities in other countries, right? You got to have a bank account that the stuff can go into. You got to be able to tell your shoppers not only what they're buying in, but what they're settling in, which can be different, right? If you're not careful, you might end up charging them in one currency and displaying another. And I mean, this problem is so complex that even JP Morgan, moves money around, hundreds of billions of dollars, and they're looking at how can we not deal with currency exchange rates. So if they're having trouble figuring it out, what hope does a small business have?
Yeah, well, and it seems like a lot of these e-commerce merchants want their shoppers to figure it out.
Yeah, they do.
Which is like, if I buy something online domestically, I know how much it's going to cost, and I know roughly when I'm going to get it. Right. But internationally, if you're just charging in your currency and making the shopper figure out they don't even know what's going to show up on their statement. So they don't even fully know what it's going to cost, let alone if they send it DDU or DDP, which we've kind of talked through on some other things. But that can't be the best experience at all for the shopper.
No, not at all. And what it's kind of created is this like apprehension for people to buy from other countries. I bought a lot of stuff from Japan, frequently, and it's pretty obvious to me when I go through an experience where the merchant has thought either the shopper will deal with it or they're piecing stuff together where, you just hit buy and then you're like, maybe it'll show up at some point, That's definitely not a good experience. The other thing it's created is kind of these monster shoppers that are willing to deal with the challenge, but they become really, really good at all the details. So they have higher expectations now all of a sudden. They know the ins and outs. And so if there's even a small mess up in any part of the process, they come hounding.
Would you say there's been an evolution of sorts in the shopper's expectation in general when buying cross-border?
Definitely. I mean, it's like I mentioned, historically, when you go to buy things online, and still you'd be surprised at the amount of stores that have this kind of experience. You get redirected to either a whole different site that has limited products, it looks worse, or a whole different checkout where, it looks like it's from 2008, some sort of ASP.NET thing that doesn't really look or feel like the brand you're shopping on at all. And it's really easy to feel like second fiddle when you're buying with that kind of experience, but either you put up with it and hope for the best, or you kind of bounce because it looks fraudulent. And so over time, especially as more and more people have been shifting online, and more, as I call them, domestic native checkouts, where people have distributors or ability to ship domestically in each country, they're getting more exposure to really, really nicely designed software that is really fast, is really branded, and is really trustworthy.
On top of that too, I think that we've seen some of these trends in Canada with some of the reports that Canada Post puts out every year about buying expectations of Canadian shoppers, which is more and more often they're expecting to be able to pay the duties and taxes.
Yep.
Right at checkout or upfront. Right. I mean, one of those big cross-border shopping experiences. If you're actually going to create a good experience, versus letting them be surprised at the door, just that one's that's always the big one that we're addressing, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's the worst feeling ever for a shopper to be excited about something and then have for whatever reason their excitement squashed, right? That hurts the shopper's enthusiasm about not only shopping internationally, but your brand, because they're going to assume that you caused them to suffer, even if there's some regulatory system they're working within.
One of the things we talk about regularly here is the distribution of countries that do really well, especially when you're shipping from an English-speaking country. And there's big economies like Japan and others that they will buy, but not at the same essentially ratio of per capita, right? That maybe to the UK or an English-speaking country. So talk about the role of translation a little bit, and also maybe even a little bit of kind of what you've done at Zonos and to solve for this problem at scale. Yeah, because I think solve for it at scale is very difficult, especially when you have all these different platforms out there and experiences.
Yeah, I mean, designing for international, first is really interesting. And there's a lot of problems that you come across that are not really documented in any of the kind of UX design spaces. So we come across a lot of novel problems, and a lot of those have to do with kind of breaking outside of the Anglosphere, all of the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. So a few things that really, matter. First of all, obviously, translation is huge. A lot of international shoppers are used to translating things online when they buy, but not having to do that shows a level of respect to the shopper, which is really important. Another thing that is pretty important is being able to accurately know where the shopper is from, and if you get it wrong, letting them choose it. So one interesting thing we came across actually recently was this realization that flags are not languages. And we found that in our UI, we were displaying flags as the country selector or the language selector. But for example, like US uses English, but is not a UK flag. So what flag do you display for that? All of these little things, they add up and make your site feel more local or not. Another one that we've done somewhat recently is some countries, like Japan is a good example, they don't use Latin characters in their alphabets by default. They might have formats online, like China has Pinyin and stuff for doing that, but most people may not be using that, especially older people. And so they might have their browser autofill an address, or they might just type it out on their keyboard, and you're going to get characters that can't be used in shipping labels and stuff, which is problematic. So we actually shipped a feature that's using GPT to automatically determine whether there are allowed characters or not. And not only that, but provide a suggested Latin character-based alternative so that they can enter in what they're used to. And then when you go to ship it, it's not a problem at all. So we were working with one of our larger customers on our new version of the checkout, and they had this problem. They wanted to solve it originally by putting a Taiwanese post office provided address translator as a link. And they're like, well, our customers are used to using this tool. So we just built it directly into the checkout. That removes that one step of friction.
Yeah. Well, wow.
That's cool.
We're going to have an episode coming up soon about products inclusive of duty and tax.
Yeah.
Why is that important, and when? Even though, I mean, we're going to this is a small feature of the things you're going to have to deal with deal with on the, for checkout and some of the shopper experience side, even though we have a whole team that works on this. But yeah, talk a little bit about the what is inclusive pricing?
Yeah, I mean, in the US, we're not too used to it because sales tax varies a lot by locale. But if you take 5 minutes, you go on Reddit or Twitter and you see some of these threads, it's like, as a European, what surprised you coming to the US? There's almost always the number one thing they mention is taxes being variable by location and not knowing what the final amount is until they get to checkout. So, the US isn't really used to this. I think it's kind of backwards. I think that Europe is right in this regard to expect that everything is all in one. especially now that we have software that can actually handle complex tax rules by location where, 30, 40 years ago, we may not have. So in these cases, it's really beneficial to meet the shoppers where they expect it kind of culturally, to have all of the extra fees bundled in the final price so that there's nothing else added. They're just seeing the item price that they added to their cart is what they're paying plus their shipping or whatever. And so with, you often hear that in the sense of tax, but our inclusive pricing that we're rolling out that'll be working across all of our e-commerce experiences also supports the duties and VAT being included so that you don't have any of that. So it really does feel like you're just buying, locally.
So is that something you'd want to do across the board to every country?
I mean, I don't think I would suggest that. I mean, we see UK and Europe especially really preferring this, but the US not so much. So it just depends on locale. And I don't really see a huge downside of doing that other than the potential conversion hit. I mean, the way you display the fees, even if it's the same amount, can affect things. So kind of culturally, there's just different culturally expectations.
Yeah, I mean, we use the term localization a lot, which really is just making it feel like a domestic transaction, right? So whatever the buyers typically expect when they go to their local grocery store, or if they buy online locally, then give them that same type of experience even on a cross-border transaction.
Yep,
right?
It's all about reducing cognitive load on the shopper, right? So as you go about your day and you have little pieces of friction, they add up over time. They stress you out. They may get to the point where you're just sick of it and you don't want to deal with something. And so when an international shopper is buying online from outside their country, the base cognitive load is already really high. And so any tiny friction points can just put them over the limit really easily, where, if it didn't start with a high base, then that wouldn't be a problem. So we're really focused on reducing anything we can do, or doing anything we can do to reduce the cognitive load of buying online so that it doesn't go over to the point where they're frustrated and give up.
That makes sense. Well, and then that builds a lot of confidence. I think that's the biggest thing too, is if you're worried about surprises, either at the doorstep with duty and tax, or what's my credit card statement actually going to be when I get it, and the transaction's straightforward, simple, and exactly what I'm used to, I'm going to be a lot more likely to buy. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I bought a camera recently imported from eBay Japan. And I didn't know at the time that camera equipment is duty free. So the whole time I was worried about getting charged duty, and I was just stressed out until I got the camera with the commercial invoice, and I said, oh, there's no duty. If I had known all this up front, I would probably have, 1% less stress per day that I was waiting for that order.
Might be buying more cameras too, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You knew that.
Yeah, now I know, I can buy as many cameras as I want. I'm not going to get $300 in charges, which, when you buy expensive stuff, it adds up a lot.
So, I mean, we've talked a lot about that kind of that localization, shopper experience. What do you see the future of e-commerce and cross-border e-commerce looking like? What are some of the things on your mind?
Yeah, I see borders increasingly, kind of paradoxically, feeling less of an issue on the internet, but at the same time, the real world environment is changing in a way where cross-border is going to become even harder, as especially for less than truckload, like small value stuff. As the volume is increased, countries have started wanting to get a piece of the pie, especially as we've seen with the U.S. Having discussions about changing the de minimis or changing the rules in some way that will, target low volume or high volume, low value shippers. So while I think that the concept of borders will be less important, when you do cross a border, there's going to be so many more points of friction that are possible. So it's going to be even more important for us to provide software and solutions that handles that. I also see a continued shift away from like major platforms, Amazon and Shopify, towards doing it all yourself with headless e-commerce systems. And I think that also kind of rolls into social buying, like on TikTok, Shop, Facebook, Instagram, kind of opening the concept of a storefront up to, rather than a specific place you go, it's anywhere that you're engaging with the brand may become an opportunity for purchasing. And those all have different, UI and UX problems as well, and on top of the base problems of cross-border. So those are all things that I think are quite fun design challenges that we will have the chance to take a look at.
All right, let's now, what are you building to fix some of these problems, Josh? Right? Like, tell us about the things that are all those crazy ideas that are going on in your head, and what's on your priority list. And then would love to hear a little bit about the product, right, that you've built out with Zonos Checkout, which I think kind of,
it's all interrelated.
It's all related.
So, the first thing that I worked on here when I started was coding for Zonos Checkout, the first version of Zonos Checkout, which is one of the original products of Zonos. And that was in 2016. And at that point, the project was considered legacy even then. And flash forward to now today, all the stuff that we wrote at that time is now legacy. But there's a whole forgotten layer of legacy that powered a lot of Zonos for a long time. And so I had been advocating for a long time that we should kind of tackle rebuilding that from the ground up so that we can have a shopper experience that is modern and really, really nice. So for the last year and a half, we've been working on building this new checkout, as we call it. It is a really nice checkout, I think, even if it was not for cross-border at all. So it allows you to present your brand in a really, really professional way. In a lot of cases, it's actually nicer than the checkout that the merchant already has installed, and that's some of the feedback we've heard, even from enterprise merchants. So it's really pretty. It's really bleeding edge on technology, which was something that was really important to us, that we're like, if the life cycle of this product is 10 plus years, like the last one, how can we build it in a way that lets us continually deliver new value over the next 10 years instead of getting stuck in a feature freeze? So we are bleeding edge in terms of web technologies. It's really, really fast. It's really, really easy for us to make new features and changes and fixes on, which is in stark contrast to what we had before. So some of those things, like I mentioned, we were able to build this address translation feature kind of within a few days based on a customer need, and we rolled it out to everyone and were able to give a lot of value. So that's really exciting. It also builds this infrastructure that we now have as a trusted and it's a trusted hook into the merchant's site, that they trust Zonos, they know it's fast and good, and now we can start delivering other things to the merchant through this technology platform. So we have Zonos Hello, which is our widget that powers currency conversion and localization features like custom messages and all of that. We also are planning on building returns functionality where all of the returns will be able to happen inside of this platform. The merchant doesn't have to add anything extra to their site configuration wise, and it just works. Stuff like that. And then the APIs that power it are really customizable and really powerful. So if you're doing a custom setup in an enterprise site, headless, whatever, it was really easy to get started and get going. So it's quite cool.
And then I think the ease of use in the checkout, there's a lot of it's doing the address completion, right? So, so you start typing the address, doesn't matter what country you're in, it's going to help you auto-complete that address and get the address right. And then talk a little bit about the payment experience. Like, what is that like for the shopper? Because there's so many different payment methods out there, right? And, and how do you display all of those to somebody at one time?
It varies a lot, right? In the US, we are addicted to credit cards. I know Australia, Canada, a few other places, they have high usage of credit cards. Some places don't use credit at all. Some places, like Brazil, has a popular payment method called boletos, which is actually you complete the payment in person. So part of reducing the frustration factor and making something localized is being able to actually take people's money in an easy way, which is surprisingly different by countries, right? In Europe, they use bank transfers a lot. It makes us look like the dark ages over here in the US with Venmo and stuff. So we need to support all of those things. So we're doing that through using Stripe under the hood. And what we can do is actually geolocate the customer. And based on the location that we've determined them to be in, we can surface different payment methods that are rank ordered by what is most likely to convert. And that's based on hundreds of thousands of transactions and stuff that Stripe has done. So for example, if you're going to go into Brazil, you might see boletos. If you're going to go into the Netherlands, you'll see ideal bank transfers and credit cards and other stuff like that. We're also aware that kind of economic trends are affecting the way people buy. So, stuff like being able to do buy now, pay laters and payment installation plans. We've seen those become a lot more popular as people are kind of feeling squeezed economically. And so we want to make sure that we have the ability for all of our merchants to offer the right types of payment methods to their shoppers, but not have to think about it at all.
And then the one thing I think that with Hello and the checkout that you haven't touched on, and maybe because I think it might just be obvious, is translation, right? It's going to be translated on Hello.
It's one of those things
and inside the checkout.
It's one of those things that we take for granted, but it's good to call out. Yeah, the UI is all translated, and like I mentioned, we're going beyond just translating the strings in the UI. We're doing stuff like auto localizing addresses, making sure the number formats are right, making sure that if we are doing a greeting to someone, like saying hello, welcome to the shop, that it's actually like coagularly appropriate for that language or locale. Supporting right to left translation for like Hebrew and Arabic, those kind of things. So it works out of the box regardless of where you're from, and it feels perfectly native without you having to translate anything on your end as a shopper.
Yeah, when you say native, I mean, it's not a redirect to another website. It's actually on their website.
Mm-hmm. It's embedded directly on your site. And that's one of those things that we spend a lot of time researching technologically how to do, because it sounds simpler than it actually is. So we had to be able to have a light footprint on the site, which means that performance and load times are of critical importance. So there can't be extra crap that's loading. It can't impede the domestic experience either. And then also we have to be able to not conflict with any of the code that's in place on the merchant site while providing us an experience or an environment that we can actually build these experiences on. So we created a framework that we call Zonos Elements, which is based on Stencil. And it essentially lets us embed web components that don't disrupt with anything else on the merchant site, and has a minimal load time. It's really fast, cached, and it's really nice. We did a lot of research, and I think it paid off as we found, customers starting to integrate with really, really advanced setups like server-side rendering and stuff like that. It's just handled all of it without a problem.
So what advice would you give to a merchant that is wanting to get started now? And they're like, okay, I heard the podcast.
Yeah.
And maybe they're not, going to, the easy answer is use Josh's product that he's building at Zonos. But
yeah.
What is the, what are some simple things a merchant can do?
So the simplest thing you can do is start translating your website either with an AI service or paying someone to do it.
I know Shopify has a native thing to allow for translation on Shopify.
So making those translations available will help a ton. Performance is pretty important. So if your site is based in the US or somewhere else and your servers are also based there, you might see multi-second load times halfway across the world unless you're being careful about where you're caching and where your CDNs are located, which is something our stuff handles automatically under the hood, but you need to make sure your hosting handles that. And then, installing something like Zonos Checkout or the Zonos for Shopify app that allows you to take payments locally with prepaid duties and everything is going to remove that friction from your shoppers. And then I think that the last thing I would advise is consider doing something like a headless e-commerce setup with server-side rendering, because you're going to save a lot of money on bandwidth, and you're also going to make a lot of money in increased conversion. When you add all of that together, you're going to have a really nice recipe for success.
Okay, so for anyone that is listening that wants to learn more about the Zonos Checkout and get in touch with the team, what's the best way to do that?
Check it out on Zonos.com. We have some comprehensive documentation, and then we'd be happy to get you set up and started. It's pretty easy to get set up. We found if you have one of our plugins like for BigCommerce, Magento, or whatnot, it's pretty much a 10-minute install if you're willing to buckle down and get going. If it's custom, we have a JavaScript API that's really easy to use. And you can integrate it in a day if you know what you're doing. So,
look, I've seen the documentation. I've read it all. We have a lot of documentation online. I think we have 500 different user guides.
We do.
And a lot of that is dedicated to checkout. I mean, everything you talked about today, the currency, the translation, the fraud, the entire experience is outlined and how it works, and then also how to integrate.
Yeah, and it's all about making sure that our merchants have the right information to succeed, not only with the checkout specifically, but the general concepts, right? So when we talk about fraud protection or alternate payments, we're not just trying to inform you on how to turn it on within Zonos. We're trying to teach you how to be truly successful and how to be an expert on your own right, so that you can answer the right things for your shoppers.
Yeah, I think when I look at checkout, I think of it as it's the culmination of all the different things that Zonos does.
It is.
And it leverages everything we've built.
Yeah, I call it the white glove approach. It's the Rolls Royce of what we offer in terms of having all of the features, including features that you don't think of yourself. You know, like Rolls Royce has the soft closed doors with motors, so that even if you slam the door, it closes softly. They thought of everything, and we like to think of the checkout as being the same kind of experience because it requires the least amount of work on the merchant side to do the most amount of effort.
Yep, this has been great. Well, Josh, we're gonna have to bring you back for another episode, but appreciate all the insights on the shopper experience. And until next time, thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
Josh.
you.